Oh God, that's a big question. But from, I think, from my point of view, what is most important is that the world is very small. That the most important thing is that it is not very big compared to the number of people and compared to the economic activity going on. And so one should very often think more about environmental constraints and resource constraints than one is typically doing. If you want to know why there is 10% unemployment today, I presume the only answer which is correct is that there are very rapid structural reforms going on, in the sense that all the Chinas of the world, the low cost producing countries, are starting to compete very effectively with the jobs that we did before in our part of the world. And then secondly, there is the less attractive shift from blue collar workers to white collar workers influence over the last, call it 20 years. Gradually what has happened over the last 20 years is that income differentials in Western societies have increased. It means that the rich have gotten richer and the poor or the middle class has stayed constant. And this means that there is an increasing demand arising out of those few people that have a lot of money compared to the rest. And so these two things, increasing importance of China and other developing countries, and more skewed distribution of income, are the two main reasons why there is slightly more unemployment now. But my first answer, I think, is there isn't. It's only that all young people think at all times that it's more difficult now than it was before. I don't think it is. I think that the most serious problem the world is facing at this time is the climate challenge, or the climate problem. And I'm worried that humanity is not going to decide to take strong action in time. And if this decision is being postponed, this means that the world will have to live with much more serious climate problems in the middle of this century than they would otherwise have had to do. And so I hope desperately that we will see strong climate action in 2030. This means basically strong action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which means strong action for energy efficiency, for renewable energy, for carbon capture and storage, and for protecting the world's tropical forests. My problem, the real problem here, I think, is democracy. I'm afraid that democratic governments will not get the political support from the electorate, from the voters, to do those things that are necessary to do. So in sum, what I desperately hope will have happened is that there will be strong climate action in 2030. Hopefully much less role than now. I think that the market, has solved essentially those problems that the market can solve. And over the next 20 years, I hope for a stronger governmental intervention in order to, more regulation, in order to try to handle those problems that are not solved by the market. And the same thing goes for competition. What has happened over the last 20 to 30 years is that the world has swung from a situation with a lot of state planning and into a situation which is dominated by the capitalist markets and competition. And I think we're basically at the end of that swing, and now over the next 30 years, I both think and I hope that we will move back towards more regulation. There is, of course, an enormous amount of work that needs to be done. And so, like, to create a new energy system, or to take care of all the old people, or to take care of the sick people, or to produce houses for the poor, etc. So there is endless amount of work. The question is, do we manage to organize the economy in such a way that all of that work is paid for in some way or the other, so that people take jobs? And I think that what many of the problems you see today are because one isn't willing to do a lot of governmental planning or state planning. Cleaning up the garbage in Napoli, would be very simple. You would simply tax people and then pay other people to clean up the garbage. With a market solution, that doesn't work, but with a state intervention system, that would work. What is then the problem? The problem is, of course, that most of the voters are silly enough that they don't understand that they ought to be in favor of more state intervention and higher taxes, that this would basically solve their problem. So yes, the future of the world of work, in my mind, is that there will be gradually over the next several decades more state intervention, and yes, this will create paid work in those sectors where we need work done. Much of this work will not lead to increased income. It will be work that needs to be done, but doesn't lead to increased consumption of red wine and pizza. But it basically gets, other problems solved. You can just point to those problems that are currently not being solved, namely climate problems, care for the old, housing for the poor, etc. All those things that needs to be done are the things that will be done in the future. If I am right, a lot of it is going to be done. If I am wrong, only a little bit of this is going to be done. When students ask me what shall I study, which since I was the president of the Norwegian School of Management for many years, I've been asked that question very many times. I always answer that you should study something that you're interested in, because most likely you will then manage to get a job irrespective. And if you do not get a job, you can just re-educate yourself. So I would always advise, if there is anything you're interested in, do that, because most likely that is going to work. If you are to choose strategically, then you have to have an answer to my basic question, will increased regulation, take place over the next 10 to 20 years? And will this lead to a situation where the state basically puts people to work at climate issues, at the old person's care, etc., or do you not think that this will happen? So everyone has to make a guess, I guess. One should view one's degree as a ticket, as an entry ticket to life. And that in the old days, 500 years ago, if you had strong muscles and were a fertile woman, you would have a great future. In this day and age, muscles don't help much. One needs to have a big brain. So this is the era for thinking and academic pursuits, sad to say, for those that are strong, and very good for those that have a big brain. So basically, a degree is proof that you are suited to live in a post-industrial society. Yeah, that's in my life, I've always had a job in order to get enough income so I could spend my time fighting for the things I believe in. So, so you basically need to decide how many trillion lira you need every year in order to survive. And once you have that, then you can do what you want to do. Very few people have the luxury of being able to, do what they like in their main job. But that's, of course, something one should try to do. But I think it's much more likely that you have to do the parallel thing, that you make enough money somewhere so that you can spend time on what you believe in. That's very difficult to respond to, because, of course, if you are, by being very good is, of course, one way of doing it. But I think it is. I think again, putting it the other way around is much more effective. If you know what you want to do, try to place yourself in a position where those things are being done. And even if you start sweeping the floor in the offices of those places which actually work on the issues you think are important, normally it will not take a long time before you then get a real job on the inside. There are two dominant issues in the world today. And the one is climate stabilization, and the other is poverty alleviation. So one is to stop greenhouse gas emissions, and the other is to create enough economic development among the poor of the world that they also get into the middle class. And I think that anything you can read about those two issues, climate and poverty, would give a good guide. I mean, if you have a strong opinion on what should be done in those two areas, that's a great help. And then you would also try to learn what is most likely to happen in those areas. If you know those two things, then you know a lot more about what you should be doing in the future and what you can be doing. The weather makers, the makers of the good weather, and the guy who wrote it is called Tim Flannery. And this is the type of book that a university student could and should read. So that's the climate side. On the poverty side, Lester Brown has written a book, I think, which is called Plan B, which also includes the poverty issue, because it focuses a lot on food, how to make enough food in the world, but it also has the other issues. So Tim Flannery and Lester Brown, then you have at least two. And then, of course, you should read The Limits to Growth, which I joined in writing many years ago, which talks about how difficult it is to live on a small planet.